Hi, I'm Steve, and I'm an expert in the European communities. In today's video, I want to talk about FCO 301048. There is indeed an FCO 301048, legal and constitutional implications of UK entry into E.E.C. But there's also an FCO 74902, the legality of the UK claim to the Falkland Islands. But before you rush there to read it, it probably isn't that interesting. Originally, the public had no right of access to the stuff that the government filed, but that changed with the Public Record Act of 1958. This made records available to the public 50 years after they were filed, or, as it says in the Act, such other period either longer or shorter as the Lord Chancellor may, with the approval or at the request of the Minister or other person. Under the Public Records Act 1967, 50 years was changed to 30 years. Not everything that is filed is a report. Quite often they're folders like LCO 28678. The Treaty of Rome is not a normal treaty. In 1962, George Coldstream set up a subcommittee to look at producing a white paper to explain the constitutional issues. Since it wasn't published before the veto, it seems that it was reconvened in 1966, and then in 1967 it was published. Here it is on page 2 of the Daily Mirror. It was quite a big story. And it was presented to Parliament at the start of the Great Common Market debate of that same year. And that meant, during the implementation of the European Communities Act, when Clause 2 became controversial,
there was no concession in the wind-up speech on Clause 2 over this vital question of sovereignty.
You could read it was the crux of the Community Bill, and that there was nothing new in this principle. It had been set out in the White Paper of 1967. So if that was set out in 1967, what's FCO 301048? Well, I think you'll find it's a folder like FCO 30157, an FCO 3707, an FCO 301520, an FCO 32381. So what can you find in FCO 301048? You'll find things like written answers to questions in Parliament, like this one from Arthur Lewis. It's important to remember that just because it's in an FCO file doesn't mean that it didn't make it out to the public in another form. In FCO 301048, you'll also find this letter. It's from John Derrick, and it says, "I'm really worried about the sovereignty. Actually, the real purpose of this letter is to get gallery tickets." There is a note from Anne saying, "Tell him that it's really difficult to get tickets," along with what looks like the official reply. Just because it was put away for 30 years doesn't mean it's really sensitive, it just means it was filed. FCO 301048 also has some policy stuff, like this section here that says, "What is clear is that regardless of the fundamental but uncertain problems touched on above, the sovereignty issue comprehends a number of real problems on which there is a public uneasiness. These problems will need to be dealt with and to be explained to Parliament and the public both before we join and continuously thereafter." So not really pushing the secrecy angle there. I wouldn't worry about the Falkland Islands just yet. Remember, if this was sensitive, they could have made it 50 years, 100 years, but this is just in for the standard, unremarkable 30 years. As was FCO 301048. Okay, that's the end of my first video on FCO 301048. There has been a general misunderstanding that the sovereignty of the Treaty of Rome was hidden in this document for 30 years. It is a folder, it is not a document, and all the sovereignty we were going to sign up to was presented well in advance. In 1967, millions of people were able to tune in to primetime television and watch an explanation of things like majority voting and the supremacy of community law.
Signing this treaty and joining this European Economic Community will mean for Britain new obligations, new institutions, and new thinking.
The Council can take decisions by majority voting. Under the treaty, the court could, if Britain joined, rule that an act of Parliament which contravened the treaty or a community regulation is invalid.
Could the decisions of the British Parliament be overruled as a result of decisions made by the Market Commission?
Oh, certainly, yes, in so far that this decision should be in contradiction with the obligation of the Treaty of Rome.
Unfortunately, FCO 301048 is a magnet for conspiracy theorists. On my next film on it, I'm going to try and address some of those claims. Anyway, that's enough for now, and thanks for watching.